What if the idea that could save a $1 billion company didn't come from its boardroom of executives, but from the secretary nobody noticed? Anna Miller was used to being invisible. She scheduled meetings, fetched coffee, and typed up minutes while men in suits debated the future of Caldwell Dynamics. Yet, in her spare hours, on an old laptop in her tiny apartment, Anna studied the same data the engineers ignored, and she found the flaw that was crippling the company's systems. But when she finally dared to speak up, she wasn't praised. She was humiliated, laughed at, told to stay in her lane. Her idea was dismissed, only to resurface days later, claimed by a powerful executive as his own. So here's the question. What happens when the smallest voice refuses to stay silent? Can truth cut through arrogance and lies? Even in the highest towers of power, and when respect finally comes, will it be too late, or the beginning of something entirely new? Stay with us as we follow Anna's extraordinary journey from invisibility to recognition, from doubt to strength. If this story moves you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories. Now, let's begin. The winter storm rolled in over Silvergate, Colorado, with a force that rattled the tall glass windows of Caldwell Tower. Snow swirled through the night sky, thick and relentless, as if the world outside had been painted in shades of white and gray. From the 31st floor, the city lights were blurred halos, blinking faintly through the storm. Inside the boardroom of Caldwell Dynamics, the atmosphere was no warmer than the icy winds outside. The room itself was immaculate polished walnut table stretching nearly 20 feet, sleek leather chairs aligned with military precision, a wall-sized screen humming faintly with charts and graphs. Yet, despite the expensive decor, tension hung heavy in the air. It clung to the suits of the executives seated around the table, weighing on their shoulders, locking their jaws. At the head of the table stood Richard Caldwell, the man who had built Caldwell Dynamics from a modest startup into one of the country's largest manufacturers of medical devices. He was 60, but carried himself like a general in his prime, tall, lean, sharp-featured, with silver hair that only added to his aura of authority. His voice, deep and uncompromising, cut through the room like a blade. "We are losing contracts," Richard said, his hands gripping the table as he leaned forward. "Hospitals are pulling orders. Our distribution partners are restless. And what do I have from you?" He glanced around the table, his ice-blue eyes moving from one executive to another. Excuses, excuses, and delays. The executives shifted uncomfortably. Some coughed. Others pretended to review the reports in front of them. No one dared to meet Richard's gaze for long. At the far end of the room, almost hidden near the wall, sat Anna Miller. She was not part of this council of powerful men and women. She was only there to take notes, as she always did. 29 years old, quiet, neat in her navy blue suit, with brown hair pulled back in a tidy bun. Her notepad lay open before her, a black pen balanced between her fingers. Anna had been with the company for less than a year, hired as Richard's executive secretary. Her duties were simple schedule meetings, draft correspondence, make coffee, and above all, stay invisible. She was not meant to speak, let alone interrupt. But as she listened, her chest tightened. For weeks she had noticed patterns in the system reports. She had stayed late, quietly analyzing spreadsheets on her desktop, at home, on her aging laptop. She had tested ideas, simulated scenarios. She was not an engineer, not officially, but years of self-study had given her enough understanding to recognize what others were missing. Now, as Richard demanded answers, Anna felt her heartbeat thundering against her ribs. On the wall screen, another graph flickered: server, downtime, escalating. Orders delayed, production halts rising. The company was bleeding millions each day, and still, no one offered a real solution. Richard's voice grew sharper. "You call yourselves leaders, yet you cannot fix a single critical system failure. If this continues, we risk losing everything Caldwell Dynamics has built in 50 years. Anna swallowed hard. She wanted to stay silent, She wanted to keep her head down, to remain the invisible secretary. That was safer. That was what she was paid to do. But another voice whispered inside her, "If you don't speak now, you'll regret it." Her palms grew damp. She glanced at her notes, the sketches she had made of load distribution models, traffic reroutes, thresholds. Her solution was there, written in her own hand. She pressed her pen against the paper until her knuckles whitened. And then, before she could lose her nerve, she spoke. "Sir?" Anna's voice was soft, but carried just enough weight to cut through the silence. Heads turned. Executives blinked as though startled to realize the secretary had spoken. Richard's brows knit together. Anna's throat felt dry, but she forced the words out. "I think the bottleneck may be in the way our system is distributing operational loads. If we reroute the processing flow and adjust the thresholds, we might stabilize." The room froze. Every pair of eyes swung toward her. A hush fell so heavy she could hear the faint whistle of the wind against the windows. Richard straightened slowly, fixing his gaze on her like a hawk spotting an intruder in its territory. "What did you just say?" Anna's voice faltered, but she kept going. "I've been reviewing the reports in my spare time. The data suggests a miscalibration in the load balancing algorithms. If we redistribute the pressure across alternate channels, it could..." A sound broke the silence. It was laughter. From halfway down the table, Paul Bennett, the director of operations, let out a chuckle. It spread quickly, joined by a few others. One of the women, Pamela Hayes, head of HR, covered her smirk with a hand, but didn't hide the glint of mockery in her eyes. "Load balancing algorithms," Paul repeated, snickering, coming from a secretary. Anna's cheeks burned, but she sat up straighter. Richard, however, did not laugh. He moved around the table until he was standing directly before her. His presence was overwhelming, his height casting a shadow across her chair. He placed both hands on the polished table, leaning down. "Miss Miller," he said, his voice low, deliberate, each syllable like a stone dropped into a still pond. "Do you hold a degree in computer science?" "No, sir." "Are you part of the engineering department?" "No, sir." "Then tell me," his voice rose, "why my secretary believes she has the authority or the expertise to dictate technical solutions in a board meeting." Anna's chest constricted. Her eyes stung, but she refused to look away. "Because," she began, her voice trembling, "I wanted to help." Richard straightened, his face cold. "Help." His tone sliced through her courage. "Your help is fetching coffee and scheduling appointments. Leave the problem-solving to people qualified for it." He turned sharply toward Paul. "Next slide." The room exhaled collectively, relieved the storm had passed over them and landed squarely on her. Anna gripped her pen so tightly it nearly snapped. Her vision blurred. Still, she wrote meaningless notes on the pad, desperate to appear composed. Pamela leaned over as the meeting resumed, whispering just loud enough for Anna to hear. "Know your place, dear." Anna bit the inside of her cheek until she tasted blood. Outside, snow pounded against the windows, muffling the city below. Inside, the storm was quieter but far more cruel. The meeting dragged on with no resolution in sight. Charts flashed across the wall-sized screen, each one painting a bleaker picture than the last. Contract losses, missed shipments, rising customer complaints, Caldwell Dynamics, once hailed as the reliable heart of Silvergate's medical industry, was beginning to look like a company on the verge of collapse. Richard Caldwell stood tall at the head of the table, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. His posture was that of a man unwilling to yield even an inch, but his jaw twitched every time another executive failed to offer a workable solution. His patience was running dangerously thin, and everyone in the room felt it. Anna Miller sat still, pen poised above her notebook, though she had stopped taking notes several minutes ago. Her eyes darted from the charts on the screen to the nervous faces around the table. No one seemed to have an answer. Her mind, however, was far from blank. For nights she had pored over the company's public-facing reports and internal updates she had access to. She had spent long hours at her kitchen table, with her mother's old lamp casting a dim glow. coffee cooling beside her, while she scribbled equations and rough diagrams into her battered notebook. Her mother often told her she worked too hard for a job that barely recognized her, but Anna couldn't help herself. She cared. She believed in the mission of the company, in the devices they made, in the lives they touched, and now she truly knew that the solution no one else had brought forward was sitting in her notes. Her pulse quickened. Her throat felt dry. She had kept silent for weeks, convincing herself it wasn't her place. She wasn't an engineer. She wasn't an executive. She was just the secretary. But as the silence in the room stretched longer, suffocating, Anna heard her own voice echo inside her head. If you don't speak, they'll let this company sink. Her hands trembled as she set her pen down. She took a breath, and then, softly but firmly, she spoke. "Sir," she began, her voice cutting unexpectedly into the silence. Every head turned. Anna could feel the weight of their stares, but she forced herself to go on. "I believe the root cause may be in the way our operation system is distributing the load. If the thresholds were recalibrated and the flow redirected, I think we could stabilize performance and reduce downtime." For a heartbeat, the room was utterly still. Then Richard moved, slowly, deliberately. He turned toward her, his eyes narrowing. He looked almost amused, though the cold edge in his gaze revealed it was anything but. "What did you just say?" he asked. Anna cleared her throat. "I've been reviewing the logs, sir. On my own time, the pattern suggests a misallocation of resources. Adjusting the thresholds could." A sharp sound broke the moment. Laughter. It started with Paul Bennett, seated only a few chairs down from Richard. A low chuckle at first, then swelling into something louder, more derisive. He leaned back in his chair, smirking as though Anna had told a bad joke. "Thresholds," Paul repeated, shaking his head. "Did I hear that right? Our secretary thinks she's an IT specialist now?" A ripple of laughter spread across the table. A few executives covered their mouths, others exchanged smirks. Even Pamela Hayes, polished and always careful with appearances, allowed herself a sly grin. She leaned forward, her manicured fingers tapping lightly against the table. "Well," Pamela said sweetly, her voice dripping with condescension, "isn't that adorable? Miss Miller playing with the big kids." Heat rushed up Anna's neck. Her cheeks flushed crimson, but she gripped her notepad tightly, holding on as though it were a lifeline. Richard didn't laugh. Instead, he strode closer to her end of the table, his shoes clicking sharply against the polished floor. He stopped directly across from her, his shadow stretching over her. "Miss Miller," he said, voice low but cutting. "Do you have a degree in systems engineering?" Anna's lips parted, but her voice barely rose above a whisper. "No, sir." "Are you part of our technical team?" "No, sir." "Then why?" Richard demanded, his voice growing louder with each word. "Do you believe you have the authority to interrupt my board meeting with half-baked theories? You don't have the training to understand." Anna's chest tightened. The humiliation stung sharper than any blow, yet she kept her back straight, forcing herself not to shrink under his glare. "I only wanted to help," she whispered. "Help." Richard scoffed. His tone was like frost on glass. "You want to help? Then fetch coffee, answer the phone, organize schedules. That is your role. Do not mistake it for something more." A hollow silence followed his words. Pamela leaned closer to Anna, her perfume strong and suffocating, her voice a venomous whisper meant only for Anna's ears. "Know your place, sweetheart." The words sliced through her, cruel and sharp. Anna's fingers clenched around her notepad until her knuckles went white. Her vision blurred as tears threatened, but she blinked hard, refusing to let them fall. Not here, not now, around her. The meeting carried on as though nothing had happened. Paul clicked to the next slide. Richard turned his attention back to the graphs, and the executives exhaled in quiet relief. The storm had passed for them. For Anna, it still raged inside her chest. She lowered her gaze to the meaningless scrawl of her notes. She wrote words she wouldn't remember, letters that blurred together, anything to keep her hands moving, to keep herself from breaking. Outside, the storm beat harder against the glass walls of Caldwell Tower, as though the sky itself knew the weight of what had just happened. And Anna Miller, sitting small at the end of the great table, vowed silently that this would not be the end of her voice. The meeting finally ended, though Anna could hardly recall how. The minutes after her humiliation blurred together, like scenes from a dream she wanted desperately to wake from. Papers shuffled, laptops closed, chairs scraped against the polished floor. Voices rose again, light and casual, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. To the others, it was just another meeting. To Anna, it felt like a trial, and the verdict had been handed down against her. She gathered her notepad and pen with shaking hands, careful not to let them slip. Her legs felt unsteady as she rose from her chair. The executives were already chatting about weekend ski trips and investment strategies, their laughter echoing off the high ceilings. No one spared her a glance, not even Richard, especially not Richard. She kept her eyes on the floor as she walked toward the door. The soles of her sensible black flats clicked softly against the wood, a faint counterpoint to the easy chatter behind her. Her throat burned with the effort of swallowing down the humiliation. The heavy boardroom doors closed behind her, and the silence of the hallway pressed in. For a moment she simply stood there, her back against the cool wall, her breath coming in shallow bursts. The storm outside rattled the windows, snow and ice lashing against the glass, echoing the chaos inside her chest. Why did I open my mouth? The thought struck her with the force of a hammer. She replayed Richard's words in her mind, each one sharper than the last. Fetch coffee, schedule appointments, that is your role. Was he right? Was she foolish to think she could contribute anything more? She wasn't an engineer, she wasn't trained, she was a secretary, nothing more, nothing less. And yet, the numbers she had studied, the patterns she had traced, they had made sense. Her conclusion hadn't come from thin air. It came from hours of work, from late nights bent over her laptop while the rest of the city slept. She had believed in it enough to risk speaking out. Now, she felt like a child scolded in front of the entire classroom. Anna took the elevator down to the lobby, her reflection pale and strained in the mirrored walls. She forced herself to stand tall, but the moment the doors opened to the bitter cold of the street, her shoulders sagged. She pulled her coat tighter and hurried through the swirling snow to the bus stop. By the time she reached her apartment on the east side of Silvergate, the storm had buried the streets in white. Her boots left small, lonely tracks up the worn steps of the three-story building. The hall smelled faintly of old carpet and boiled cabbage. She unlocked the door to their unit and stepped inside. Warmth met her instantly, not from the ancient radiator that clicked and clanged unreliably, but from the small world she shared with her mother. "Annie," a voice called from the living room. "Yes, Mom," Anna replied, her voice softening. She shrugged off her coat, shaking melted snow from her hair. Her mother, Margaret Miller, sat on the faded sofa, a blanket over her lap. The flicker of the old television cast a pale glow on her face. At 65, Margaret's body bore the marks of years of illness, slight tremors in her hands, a persistent shortness of breath. But her eyes, warm and brown like Anna's, still held the same quiet strength that had carried them both through so much. Dinner waited on the small kitchen table, 2 plates of roast chicken and vegetables. Modest, but enough. Anna smiled faintly at the effort. "Rough day?" Margaret asked gently, studying her daughter's face. Anna hesitated, hanging her bag on the back of a chair. "Just work," she murmured. Margaret tilted her head, her eyes narrowing. Work? Or something more? Anna sat down beside her mother on the sofa, the blanket brushing her knee. For a moment, she stared at the muted images on the TV, avoiding her mother's gaze. "I spoke up in a meeting today," she finally said. "I thought I saw a way to fix a problem, but it didn't go well." Margaret reached for her hand, squeezing it with surprising strength. "Didn't go well, or they didn't listen." Anna let out a humorless laugh. They laughed. Richard tore me apart in front of everyone." Her voice cracked on the last words, and she quickly bit her lip, fighting the sting of tears. Margaret was silent for a long moment, her thumb rubbing soothing circles on Anna's knuckles. Finally, she said, "Do you remember when I first needed the heart monitor? The one Caldwell Dynamics made?" Anna looked at her. "Of course." "That device gave me another 10 years I might not have had," Margaret said softly. "People like you, people who see problems and don't stop until they find answers. They're the reason those devices exist. Don't you ever let anyone tell you your voice doesn't matter?" Anna leaned against her mother's shoulder, the smell of lavender lotion, familiar and comforting. "Sometimes it feels like I'm invisible." "Maybe to them," Margaret said firmly, "but not to me. Not to the people who need what that company makes. And not to yourself. You have to see yourself first. Annie." The words sank deep, like an anchor finding solid ground beneath turbulent water. For the first time since leaving the boardroom, Anna felt the storm inside her calm just a little. Later. They ate together at the kitchen table, the sound of forks against plates mixing with the faint hum of the old refrigerator. The TV in the other room played a rerun of some sitcom laugh track, muffled and distant. The world outside was still cold, still merciless. But in this small apartment, with her mother's steady presence beside her, Anna felt something she hadn't in hours: hope. The snow outside had thickened by the time Anna and her mother cleared their plates. It fell in heavy curtains against the narrow kitchen window, muting the glow of the street lamps below. The little apartment was warm by comparison, though the radiator hissed unevenly, never quite keeping pace with the storm. Margaret carried the tea kettle to the table, her steps slow but steady. The steam curled upward as she poured into 2 mismatched mugs, one chipped with faded daisies, the other plain white, its handle glued back together years ago. Anna wrapped her hands around the warm ceramic, letting the heat seep into her cold fingers. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence was not heavy like in the boardroom. It was gentler, filled with the familiar sounds of home, the hum of the refrigerator, the whistle of wind through the window frame, the faint clink of spoons against porcelain. Margaret studied her daughter's face. She didn't need to ask what was wrong. She had already seen it in Anna's hunched shoulders, in the way her eyes carried a weight too heavy for 29 years. "You don't have to tell me everything," Margaret said finally, her voice soft. "But I know when something is breaking your heart." Anna stared into her tea. The steam fogged her glasses, and she pushed them up onto her head. "It's work, Mom. It's always work." "Work doesn't usually leave you looking like you've lost a piece of yourself," Margaret replied. Her tone wasn't accusing, just steady, matter of fact. Anna let out a shaky breath. "I spoke up today, in a board meeting." She gave a humorless laugh. "I thought I had something important to say, but I was wrong." Margaret tilted her head. Wrong. Or dismissed. Anna's throat tightened. She remembered the laughter, the way Pamela leaned in with her cruel whisper. She remembered Richard's voice, hard and final. "Fetch coffee? That is your role." They laughed at me. Anna admitted, her voice cracked. "He humiliated me in front of everyone, and maybe I deserved it. Maybe I should have kept my mouth shut." Margaret reached across the table, placing her frail hand over Anna's. Her skin was thin, her grip gentle but steady. "Annie," she said, using the nickname she had given her daughter as a child. "You were born to do more than take notes." The words struck deep, like a hand pressing against a wound, and yet somehow healing it at the same time. Anna blinked rapidly, her lashes wet. "I don't know anymore. I thought I saw the answer. I thought I could help. But when they all looked at me, it was like I didn't belong there at all. Like I was an intruder." Margaret's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. "Do you remember the first time you tried to fix the toaster?" Anna let out a short, surprised laugh. "I nearly set the kitchen on fire. But you figured it out," Margaret said firmly. "You've always been that way. When something breaks, you can't rest until you understand why. That's not a weakness. Anna, that's your gift." Anna shook her head. A gift no one wants. Not there. Not with him watching me like I was some child out of place. Richard Caldwell is just a man, Margaret said, her tone sharpening for the first time. He may have money and power and all the arrogance that comes with it, but that doesn't mean he sees clearly. Sometimes the people at the top are the blindest of all. The storm rattled the windows, and both women turned to watch the snow piling on the sill. The world outside was harsh, swirling with white fury, but inside the apartment, the lamplight glowed golden against the peeling wallpaper. Margaret lifted her mug, sipping slowly. "You can walk away if you need to," she said. "I'll never blame you for that. Life is hard enough without fighting every battle. But don't you dare walk away because someone told you you're less than you are." Anna swallowed hard. She wanted to protest, to say she was too tired, too small to keep fighting. But the words wouldn't come, because deep down, beneath the humiliation and the doubt, she still knew she was right. She had seen the numbers. She had traced the patterns. The solution she offered wasn't foolishness, it was truth. And if she gave up now, she would be betraying not just herself, but every patient who depended on the devices Caldwell Dynamics made, people like her mother, people who couldn't afford for the company to fail. She leaned her forehead against the cool rim of the mug, closing her eyes. What if they never see me? Mom? What if I'm always invisible to them? Margaret's hand tightened gently around hers. You don't need everyone to see you. You just need the right people to see you. And they will, Annie. One day, they will. For a long while, they sat together in silence, sipping tea, watching the snow fall like feathers through the dark night. The storm outside was fierce, relentless. But in that small kitchen, between the hum of the radiator and the warmth of her mother's presence, Anna felt something she hadn't felt since the boardroom strength stirring quietly inside her. She didn't know how or when, but she knew she wasn't done. Not yet. The storm had passed overnight, leaving Silvergate blanketed in a pristine coat of snow. Morning sunlight bounced off the white rooftops, dazzling and cold, as if the city itself had been scrubbed clean. Inside Caldwell Tower, however, the air was anything but fresh. Whispers traveled faster than the elevators, rushing from floor to floor before Anna even reached her desk. By the time she set her bag down and switched on her computer, she had already heard fragments. Paul really saved us. Genius move. Didn't see it coming. Caldwell looked relieved for once. Anna tried to ignore them, but her stomach twisted tighter with every passing comment. She opened her inbox. The first message flashing bold at the top was from the corporate communications team, subject celebrating innovation at Caldwell Dynamics Body. Yesterday evening, Director of Operations, Paul Bennett implemented a critical system adjustment that has already begun stabilizing our production line. His innovative thinking has prevented further losses and restored client confidence. Please join us in congratulating Paul for his decisive leadership during this crisis. The words blurred as Anna read them again and again. Implemented a critical system adjustment, stabilizing production line, innovative thinking. Her chest constricted. She didn't need to ask what adjustment meant. She knew. Every sentence in the announcement described her solution. The load distribution reroute. The recalibration of thresholds. The same idea she had offered in the boardroom. The same idea Richard had shot down. And now, Paul Bennett was being praised as the savior of Caldwell Dynamics. Anna sat frozen, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. The hum of the office seemed to recede into the background, the ringing phones, the chatter of assistants, the rhythmic clicking of keyboards. All she could hear was the echo of her own voice from the day before, trembling but certain, offering the very fix that was now being celebrated before Richard silenced her. Her jaw tightened, heat flared in her chest, not from embarrassment this time, but from something sharper, anger. She pulled open her notebook, flipping to the page where she had scribbled the diagrams of the system flow. Her handwriting, rushed but precise, stared back at her. She had been right. She knew she had been right, and Paul had taken it. Her pen pressed so hard against the page that it tore a small hole in the paper. She snapped the notebook shut, her hands trembling. Across the floor, a burst of laughter rose near the break room. She glanced up to see Paul himself holding court with a cluster of managers. His suit was a shade too flashy for the office, his smile wide and self-satisfied. He gestured animatedly, as though recounting his heroic moment of brilliance. The others leaned in, nodding, laughing at his jokes. Anna's stomach churned. She wanted to march over, slam her notebook onto the table, and shout, "This was mine. You know it? You stole it." But she didn't move. Her legs felt rooted to the floor, weighed down by the same force that had silenced her in the boardroom. Who would believe her? She was a secretary? He was a director. And even if they did believe her, what then? She pictured Richard's face, hard and dismissive. He hadn't even considered her words worth entertaining. If she accused Paul now, Richard would only see her as petty, unprofessional, maybe even delusional. Her chest ached with frustration. At noon, she slipped away to the cafeteria, tray in hand, though she had little appetite. The place buzzed with chatter about Paul. His name floated through the air like a chorus. Paul this, Paul that. Every conversation seemed to orbit around him. She sat alone at a corner table, her fork idly pushing steamed vegetables around her plate. Her phone buzzed with a new message from her mother. "Margaret, how's your day going? Sweetheart, hope it's better than yesterday." Anna stared at the screen, her throat tightening. She wanted to type the truth. It's worse. Someone stole my idea, and the whole company thinks he's a hero. But her thumbs hovered uselessly over the keys. Instead, she typed, "I'm fine. Just busy." The lie stung, but she couldn't bring herself to burden her mother with the injustice of it all. Margaret had enough to worry about. Anna slipped her phone back into her bag, resting her elbows on the table and pressing her palms against her forehead. She felt trapped, caught between her fury and her helplessness. If she stayed quiet, Paul would bask in glory built on her work. If she spoke up, she risked ridicule all over again. Maybe even her job. What am I supposed to do? She thought bitterly. For the rest of the day, she kept her head down, typing up Richard's calendar changes and responding to trivial emails while the office buzzed with congratulations for Paul. Every laugh that echoed across the floor felt like another slap. Every mention of his genius pressed deeper into the raw wound of betrayal. When the clock finally struck 5, Anna gathered her things slowly, waiting for the office to clear. Outside, the sky had darkened, the snow turning to slush under the tires of evening traffic. She walked to the bus stop with her collar pulled high against the wind, her notebook heavy in her bag. On the ride home, she stared out the fogged window, watching the blurred lights of Silvergate flicker past. Her reflection stared back at her, pale and tired, but her eyes burned with something new. She wasn't just humiliated anymore. She wasn't just invisible. She had been robbed. And though she didn't yet know how, Anna Miller promised herself one thing: she would not stay silent forever. The next morning, Anna walked into Caldwell Tower with her head slightly lower than usual. She tried to focus on the rhythm of her heels tapping against the marble floor, tried to drown out the chatter that once again surrounded her. The celebration of Paul Bennett hadn't faded overnight. It had only grown louder. By the time she reached her desk, a new email announcement was waiting. Director of Operations Paul Bennett will present his breakthrough solution to the board next week. Attendance mandatory. Anna closed the message quickly, her stomach churning. It felt like a cruel joke, seeing her work paraded as Paul's breakthrough. She clenched her hands in her lap, steadying her breath. "Anna," the voice startled her. She looked up to see David Harper standing near her desk, shifting awkwardly on his feet. David was a junior engineer in the research and development department, known more for his quiet diligence than for bold moves. He wore his usual rumpled sweater under a lab coat that still smelled faintly of solder and machine oil. "I was hoping to catch you," he said, glancing around as though making sure no one was listening. can we talk?" Anna hesitated, then nodded. David gestured toward the side hallway, away from the steady flow of executives. They slipped into a small break room that was empty except for a vending machine humming in the corner. David leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. His voice dropped to a near whisper. "I've been looking at the system logs from last week." Anna's breath caught. "Why?" "Because something didn't sit right," he said. Paul's solution. What everyone's praising him for it wasn't his. At least, it didn't look like his. Her pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" David rubbed the back of his neck. "I've seen Paul's work. He's not exactly the hands-on type, but the changes in the system, the code adjustments, they're careful, precise. And when I cross-reference them with the archived drafts, I found traces of another hand. Yours." Anna froze. "Mine?" He nodded. "The parameters, the thresholds, exactly the way you outlined them in those notes you were scribbling last week. I recognize the structure. You may not realize it, but you have a style, a mix of relief and dread washed over her. Finally, someone saw the truth. But that truth was dangerous. I can prove it," David continued, his voice firm now. "If we dig deeper, we can pull the metadata, the timestamps. It'll show Paul only deployed it, not designed it." Anna's mouth went dry. The thought of exposing Paul filled her with a rush of vindication. But right behind it came the fear Richard's sharp words, Pamela's smirk, the threat of being cast out for speaking out of turn. "David," she whispered, "if we do this, if we challenge him, I could lose everything. They'll say I'm overstepping again. They'll call me insubordinate, maybe even fire me." David's eyes softened. "I know the risk. But Anna, you can't let him steal from you like this. You did the work. You found the answer. And if Caldwell Dynamics is standing today, it's because of you." She turned toward the window, watching the snow outside drift lazily now, calmer than the storm of days before. Inside her, however, the storm still raged. What if he's right? What if this is the only chance to set the record straight? But then she imagined Margaret at home, bundled under a blanket, trusting in the devices Caldwell Dynamics made. She imagined losing her job, losing the health insurance that covered her mother's treatments. She imagined Richard's voice again. "Do not mistake yourself for something more." The weight of it pressed on her chest. "I don't know if I'm strong enough," she admitted, her voice breaking. David stepped closer, lowering his voice even further. "You don't have to be strong enough alone. Let me help. I can pull the logs. Quietly. I know where to look, and I know how to cover our tracks. No one has to know until you're ready." Anna looked at him, studying his earnest face. He wasn't laughing at her. He wasn't dismissing her. For the first time since the boardroom, she felt truly seen. "Why are you doing this?" she asked softly. "Because it's the right thing," David replied simply. "And because I've watched you work harder than anyone else here without an ounce of recognition. You deserve better." Her throat tightened, tears threatening again. She blinked them back quickly. "If they find out, they won't," David said. "Not if we're careful." For a long moment, Anna said nothing. The hum of the vending machine filled the silence between them. She wrapped her arms around herself, torn between the urge to hide and the spark of defiance burning faintly inside her. Finally, she nodded. "Okay. Show me what you found." David smiled faintly, relief flickering in his eyes. "Come by my office after hours. We'll go through it together." As they left the break room, Anna felt her heartbeat quicken, not from fear alone, but from something new, a fragile, dangerous hope. The following day unfolded like a cruel replay of the one before. Paul Bennett's heroism was still the talk of the tower, his name passed around with admiration, like a lucky charm. Everywhere Anna turned, she overheard it, his supposed brilliance, his quick thinking, his leadership, each word scraped against her like sandpaper. By mid-afternoon, Anna was sorting through Richard Caldwell's meeting requests at her desk, trying to keep her head low. Her eyes burned from lack of sleep. She had spent half the night turning over David's words, the evidence he promised, the risk of pursuing it. She barely noticed the click of high heels approaching until a shadow fell across her desk. Pamela Hayes. She wore her power the way others wore perfume, strong, deliberate, impossible to ignore. Her silk blouse was perfectly pressed, her smile perfectly polished, but her eyes, sharp as glass, gave away the steel underneath. "Anna," Pamela said, her voice honeyed but cool. "Do you have a moment?" Anna forced a polite smile. "Of course." "Good. Let's step into my office." Anna followed her down the hallway, past rows of desks where assistants typed furiously, pretending not to notice. Pamela's office was small but immaculate, with a window overlooking the snowy streets below. She gestured toward a chair opposite her desk. Anna sat, clutching her notepad to her lap like a shield. Pamela closed the door softly before leaning against the desk. "I'll get straight to the point." Her smile didn't waver, but her voice dropped low, smooth as velvet. "You embarrassed Mr. Caldwell in that meeting the other day." Anna's stomach clenched. "I was only trying to help." Pamela raised a manicured hand, cutting her off. "Intentions don't matter here. Optics do, and the optics were unfortunate." She leaned closer, her perfume strong enough to sting. "You need to remember your place. Anna, secretaries who overstep rarely last long at Caldwell Dynamics." The words hung in the air like smoke. "Are you threatening me?" Anna asked softly. Pamela chuckled lightly. "Of course not. I'm advising you. Think of it as career guidance. Stay in your lane, or you'll be gone." Anna's throat tightened. She wanted to argue, to call Pamela out for her cruelty, but her voice caught, stuck somewhere between fear and rage. Pamela straightened, smoothing the sleeve of her blouse. "I like you, Anna. You're diligent, reliable. Don't ruin that by trying to play hero. Leave the heavy lifting to the ones who know what they're doing." Anna's hands trembled under the desk, gripping her notepad so tightly the edges bent. "Understood," she said quietly, her voice barely audible. "Good girl." Pamela's smile widened, but her eyes remained cold. She moved toward the door, holding it open in dismissal. "I knew you'd see reason." Anna rose slowly, her legs stiff, her chest aching. She walked out, the sound of Pamela's heels clicking behind her like a metronome, marking the seconds of her humiliation. Back at her desk, she tried to steady her breathing. Maybe she's right. A cruel little voice whispered inside her. Maybe you're pushing too far. Maybe you're nothing more than what they say. She shook her head, forcing the thoughts away. But they clung stubbornly. That evening, after most employees had left, Anna stayed late, typing up minutes and scheduling meetings in the near-empty office. The halls were quiet, the air hushed. She decided to drop a file off in the HR wing before heading out. And as she approached, voices drifted through a half-open door. She froze. It was Pamela. Anna held her breath, pressing herself against the wall just outside the doorway. "She's suspicious," Pamela's voice said sharply. Another voice answered Paul Bennett, smooth, arrogant, unmistakable. "Let her be suspicious. No one will believe her. Caldwell shut her down himself. If she tries to speak up again, it'll only prove she doesn't know her place." Pamela scoffed. "Still, we can't afford her snooping. You were sloppy. Paul, if anyone digs too deep into those logs, I covered my tracks." Paul interrupted. "Besides, who's going to dig? The audit team won't waste time on a secretary's fantasies. And Richard trusts me. He'll never second-guess my story." Pamela's heels clicked against the floor. "Just make sure you keep it that way. If this blows up, it's both of us on the line." Anna's heart hammered in her chest. She pressed a hand against the wall to steady herself, every nerve buzzing. They knew they had stolen from her, and they were working together to bury it. She wanted to storm in, to throw the door wide and scream the truth, but her survival instinct screamed louder. If she revealed herself now, she would have nothing, no proof, No allies, just their word against hers. She slipped back down the hallway on trembling legs, the sound of their muffled voices fading behind her. When she finally stepped into the cold night air outside Caldwell Tower, snowflakes swirled around her like tiny daggers. She pulled her coat tight, her breath fogging the air. Pamela's threat echoed in her ears. Stay in your lane, or you'll be gone. But beneath the fear, another voice stirred. David's voice? You did the work. You found the answer. You deserve better. Anna hugged her bag closer to her chest. She didn't know how yet, but one thing was clear. She couldn't stay silent anymore. The office was nearly deserted by the time Anna made her way down to the research and development floor. The overhead lights buzzed faintly, casting long shadows across cluttered workbenches. Empty soda cans, stacks of circuit boards, and tangled wires littered the space, evidence of the engineers' endless late nights. David Harper sat in his small glass-walled office, bent over a computer screen. His hair was mussed, his sweater wrinkled, and yet his expression was sharp with concentration. When he noticed Anna standing hesitantly in the doorway, he waved her inside quickly. "I've got something," he said, his voice low, urgent. Anna closed the door behind her, her palms damp with nerves. "What is it?" David spun his monitor toward her. Lines of code and system logs scrolled across the screen, highlighted in yellow. "Here, these are the changes that went live last week." He tapped the glass with his finger. "And these," he pulled up another window, "are your drafts, the ones you showed me in your notebook." Anna's breath caught, side by side. The numbers were nearly identical. The same threshold adjustments, the same reroutes, even the same variable names. David zoomed in on a section at the bottom of the screen. "Look at the timestamps. The first drafts were created under a secondary account you used months ago during your internship rotation in IT. The signature is still buried in the system. Paul only copied them, renamed the final file, and pushed it through as his own." Anna's chest tightened. She reached out, gripping the edge of the desk for balance. "So it's true. I wasn't imagining it." David looked at her, his expression both sympathetic and firm. "You were right, Anna, all along, and now we can prove it." Relief flooded her for a fleeting second, but it was quickly swallowed by dread. Proof was dangerous. Proof meant choices. David leaned closer. "We should take this to the internal audit team. They're independent of Caldwell. If they see this, they'll have no choice but to investigate." Anna shook her head, stepping back. "And what then? What happens when Richard finds out I went behind his back? He already humiliated me once. He'll fire me for good this time." David's brow furrowed. "And if you don't say anything, Paul gets away with it? Pamela keeps covering for him. And you," his voice softened, "you'll disappear into the background again, knowing the truth, but watching someone else live off your work." Anna pressed her hands to her temples. Her mind spun with images: Richard's cold eyes, Pamela's smirk, Paul's smug grin as he basked in the praise. Then Margaret's face, tired but warm, depending on the medical devices Caldwell produced. If she stayed silent, the company survived, but her soul wouldn't. If she spoke, she might lose everything: her job, her stability, her mother's security. "I can't risk it," Anna whispered. "Not with Mom. Her treatments." David's voice softened further. "I know, but Anna, think about what you're teaching yourself. That it's okay to be stepped on. That your work means nothing unless someone else claims it." She sank into the chair opposite his desk, burying her face in her hands. "It's not fair." "No," David agreed, "it isn't. But fairness doesn't happen on its own. Sometimes someone has to fight for it." Silence stretched between them, filled only by the hum of the computer fan. Anna stared at the monitor again, at the undeniable proof glowing on the screen, her name hidden in the logs, her work buried beneath Paul's arrogance. Her heart pounded as she imagined hitting send, then imagined the fallout. The fear was real, sharp, suffocating. But beneath it, something stronger pulsed, a quiet defiance that had survived humiliation, threats, and theft. "I don't know if I can survive this," she whispered. David gave a faint, steady smile. "Maybe you don't have to survive it alone." The words lingered in her chest long after she left his office. That night, back in her apartment, Anna sat at the kitchen table with her laptop open. Margaret had already gone to bed, her gentle snores drifting from the next room. The glow of the desk lamp lit the pages of Anna's notebook, the familiar diagrams and notes that had started all of this. On the screen, the draft of an email waited. The address line, Internal Audit Division. The subject, urgent misrepresentation of technical work. Her finger hovered over the trackpad, trembling. If I send this, there's no going back. Her mind screamed warnings. You'll be fired. You'll be blacklisted. No one will hire a secretary who makes enemies of executives. But another voice, quiet but unyielding, spoke louder. If you don't send it, you'll always know you let them steal from you. You'll never forgive yourself. Anna closed her eyes. She thought of the boardroom, of Pamela's whisper, "Know your place." She thought of Paul laughing. She thought of Richard's voice dismissing her like a child. And then she thought of Margaret's words, "You were born to do more than take notes." Her chest rose with a deep, shaky breath. She opened her eyes, and she clicked send. The email whooshed into the void. For a long moment, Anna sat frozen, her palms slick with sweat, her heart racing as though she had jumped off a cliff. Then she leaned back in her chair, exhaling shakily. The first domino had fallen. By Monday morning, Caldwell Tower felt different. The usual hum of routine, the click of heels on polished marble, the murmur of assistants juggling calls, the low buzz of printers had been replaced by something tauter. Conversations were hushed, eyes darted nervously in hallways, and entire clusters of employees leaned together in corners, whispering about the same thing. An emergency notice had gone out at dawn, subject mandatory audit session, 2:00 p.m., attendees all directors and department heads, location, main boardroom. No one knew why, but everyone had their theories, and by the time the sun cleared the skyline over Silvergate, the rumor mill had reached full tilt. Anna sat at her desk outside Richard Caldwell's office, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She tried to look calm, but her chest rose and fell in shallow breaths. She had sent the email 3 nights ago, and now it had come to this. The Internal Audit Division had acted faster than she dared to imagine. Across the floor, Paul Bennett stormed past, his phone pressed tightly to his ear. His voice, usually dripping with swagger, carried an edge of panic as it rose over the cubicle walls. "I don't care what they found," he hissed into the receiver. "Just fix it. Erase it. Do you hear me?" He vanished into his office, slamming the door. The sound reverberated through the otherwise quiet floor. Anna lowered her gaze to the notebook on her desk, tracing the grooves in the paper where her pen had pressed too hard the night she worked out the solution. Her stomach churned. She had wanted justice. Yes, but seeing it unfold so quickly filled her with dread. Richard Caldwell emerged from his office mid-morning, his expression unusually tight. His suit was immaculate, his silver cufflinks gleaming, but his eyes were clouded with something Anna rarely saw in him: doubt. He adjusted his tie as he strode down the hallway toward a waiting call in the executive lounge. She caught fragments of his voice as he passed. Unexpected, irregularities in the system logs. "I want answers before 2 o'clock. For the first time since she'd known him, Richard sounded unsettled. The tension only deepened as the day wore on. By lunchtime, the cafeteria buzzed like a hive. Workers clustered in anxious knots. Anna sat alone at a small table near the window, her soup growing cold as she listened to the murmurs around her. They say the audit team found discrepancies in Paul's files. Caldwell's furious. If it's true, heads are going to roll. Do you think it's financial or technical fraud? Every whispered guess tightened the knot in Anna's stomach. At one point, she saw Pamela glide past, her heels sharp against the linoleum. She leaned in close to Paul, who had joined her by the vending machines, his face pale and drawn. Anna strained to hear, but all she caught was Pamela's hand gripping Paul's arm and the low, urgent murmur of her voice. When Pamela noticed Anna watching, she gave a thin, knowing smile before turning back to Paul. The hours crawled toward 2 o'clock. Back at her desk, Anna kept typing, her fingers moving mechanically while her mind roared. Each email she sent, each appointment she scheduled, felt meaningless in the shadow of what was coming. At 1:55, the executives began filing past her toward the boardroom. Their polished shoes clicked on the floor like a march toward judgment. Paul was among them, his usual swagger replaced by a stiff, brittle stride. Sweat glistened at his temples, though he dabbed at it with a folded handkerchief. Richard followed last, tall and imposing. Though his jaw was clenched, his gaze flicked toward Anna briefly, sharp as a blade, before moving on. The boardroom doors closed, sealing the group inside. Anna sat frozen at her desk. The silence in the executive wing was suffocating now, broken only by the faint tick of the wall clock and the whisper of the HVAC system. Her heart pounded in her ears as she imagined the scene inside auditors flipping through thick binders of evidence. Paul stammering excuses, Richard demanding answers. She stared at the frosted glass panels of the boardroom, where the blurred silhouettes of those inside shifted back and forth. Occasionally, a voice rose sharply enough to slip through. Metadata doesn't match. Original drafts predate your claim. Serious breach of trust. Anna's throat went dry. She clutched the edge of her desk so hard her knuckles whitened. For 2 endless hours, the meeting dragged on. Assistants tiptoed past her, whispering nervously. But Anna barely moved. She sat rooted in place, her heart climbing into her throat every time the voices behind the glass spiked. Finally, at nearly 4 o'clock, the boardroom doors swung open. The executives filed out in tense silence, their faces pale and strained. Paul stumbled out behind them, his once proud posture shattered. His tie was askew, his eyes bloodshot, his jaw clenched. He didn't look at anyone as he stormed toward his office. Richard emerged last, his expression unreadable. He paused at the threshold, surveying the floor with an icy calm that seemed more dangerous than any outburst. Then, without a word, he disappeared into his office, closing the door behind him. The entire floor seemed to hold its breath. Anna sat motionless, her pulse racing. She had wanted this. She had chosen this. But now that it was happening, she felt both exhilarated and terrified. The dominoes were falling, faster and louder than she had ever imagined. She glanced down at her notebook, her handwriting still visible on the page where it had all begun. This was mine, she thought fiercely, her chest tightening. And no matter what comes next, they know it now. Outside, the winter light had begun to fade, casting long shadows through the glass walls of Caldwell Tower. Inside, the air hung heavy, charged with the knowledge that nothing would ever be quite the same again. The boardroom felt colder than usual, as though the winter storm outside had seeped through the glass walls. Executives sat stiffly in their leather chairs, papers spread across the polished mahogany table. At the head sat Richard Caldwell, his jaw set, his piercing gaze locked on the folders the internal audit team had distributed. Anna wasn't in the room, but her name was Angela from internal audit flipped through the binder in front of her, her tone calm but unyielding. As our investigation shows, the original draft of the system recalibration script was created 3 weeks before the crisis. Metadata confirms it was written under a secondary account used previously by... She glanced down at the page. Anna Miller. The silence that followed was deafening. Chairs creaked, papers rustled. Richard's eyes narrowed. Anna Miller. He spoke the name slowly, as though testing it against reality. His secretary, the quiet figure behind the desk outside his office. Paul shifted in his seat, his face slick with sweat. "That's absurd," he said quickly, forcing a laugh that fell flat. "A secretary writing code. Come on, there must be a mistake in the logs." Angela raised an eyebrow. "We checked the system backups. The timestamps align, the logic trees, the parameters they match exactly with her drafts. Mr. Bennett. The only changes you made were cosmetic. Variable names, file titles. The core work was not yours. Murmurs rippled across the table. Several executives exchanged uneasy glances. Richard leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly. His voice was calm, but steel-edged every syllable. Are you telling me my director of operations passed off my secretary's work as his own? Paul's smile wavered. Richard, listen, I oversaw the deployment. That's what matters. I streamlined what she had. Maybe she tinkered with numbers. Sure, but she doesn't understand the bigger picture. I do. Angela slid another page across the table. This is a side-by-side comparison of her original draft and the deployed solution. They are identical, down to the decimal. Richard's eyes scanned the page. He stopped halfway, his lips pressing into a thin line, and there, buried in the code, was her name, Anna Miller. It hit him harder than he expected. He remembered the boardroom just days earlier, her voice trembling as she spoke, offering the very solution he had dismissed. He had silenced her, mocked her, reduced her to the margins of the meeting, and she had been right. Paul's voice broke the moment. Look, maybe she stumbled onto something. Maybe, but she's not trained. She had no business sticking her nose into this. I was protecting the company. If we'd let her speak out, it would have made us look weak, unprofessional. No one wants to hear that their solutions come from a secretary. The words hung in the air, ugly and raw. Angela's expression hardened. So, you admit you took her work and claimed it as your own. Paul paled. No, he stammered, then straightened, trying to recover his bravado. I led the solution. She provided background noise. I shaped it into something viable. But the room wasn't buying it. The executives who had laughed at Anna days before now avoided Paul's eyes. A few shook their heads. Richard slammed his hand down on the table, making everyone jump. Enough. His voice cut through the tension like a blade. He turned his gaze to Paul, sharp and merciless. You lied to me. You stole credit for work that wasn't yours. And worst of all, you endangered this company by burying the truth. Paul's mouth opened, but no words came. His arrogance, his smirk, all of it drained away under Richard's glare. Angela closed her folder with a decisive snap. The audit's recommendation is clear: immediate disciplinary action, termination for cause. The room was silent. Richard sat back slowly, exhaling through his nose. His eyes flicked once more to Anna's name in the log, then up to the glass wall, where her shadow lingered faintly outside, her silhouette blurred by the frosted panels. For the first time, he realized how wrong he had been. Paul slumped back in his chair, defeated. His shoulders sagged, his carefully styled hair damp with sweat. You'll regret this, he muttered under his breath, but the fight had already left his voice. Richard stood, buttoning his jacket with crisp finality. Security will escort you out. Effective immediately. The words fell like a hammer. Paul didn't resist when two guards entered the room. He only cast a bitter glance toward the blurred figure of Anna outside before lowering his head. The door shut behind them, and just like that, the man once hailed as Caldwell's savior was gone. The executives sat in uneasy silence, their gazes flicking toward Richard. He scanned the room, his voice quieter now, but no less firm. Let this be a lesson. Truth will come to light. No matter how carefully you try to bury it, no one dared respond. Richard gathered his notes, but his eyes drifted once more to Anna's name, printed in black and white. For a man used to being in control, it was a humbling reminder that genius didn't always wear a title. Sometimes, it sat quietly in the corner, ignored until it could no longer be denied. Outside, Anna sat at her desk, her hands trembling as she shuffled meaningless papers. She couldn't hear every word through the thick glass, but the shift in energy was unmistakable. Paul's red face as he stormed past her minutes later told her enough. She glanced down at her notebook again, the same one she had clutched in fear, then in anger, and now in something else entirely: vindication. But with it came a new unease. Because if Richard Caldwell now knew the truth, what would he do with it? The corridors of Caldwell Tower were unusually quiet after the audit session. Word of Paul Bennett's disgrace spread fast, but in hushed tones, as though speaking too loudly might invite the storm into one's own office. Assistants exchanged furtive glances. Managers walked briskly with papers clutched to their chests. A shadow had fallen over the building, and everyone felt it. Anna sat at her desk, her hands resting stiffly on her keyboard, though she hadn't typed a word in half an hour. Her mind spun, her heart heavy with a mix of vindication and dread. Paul was gone. That much was clear. But what came next was uncertain, and uncertainty was far more frightening. The soft click of a door opening broke her thoughts. Richard Caldwell stepped out of the boardroom. His expression was unreadable, his jaw tight, his eyes distant as if still processing the weight of what had just unfolded. Then his gaze landed on her. Anna stiffened, her breath catching. "Miss Miller," Richard said, his voice lower than usual, almost quiet. "In my office. Now." Her legs felt like lead as she stood, smoothing her skirt with trembling hands. The entire executive floor seemed to watch as she followed him into his office. The door clicked shut behind them, sealing her in with the man who had once humiliated her so completely. Richard walked to the window, hands in his pockets, staring out at the Silvergate skyline. Snow still clung to the rooftops, though streaks of melted water ran down the glass. He didn't speak at first. He just stood there, shoulders rigid, as though gathering words was harder for him than issuing orders. Finally, he turned, his blue eyes fixed on her. "Did you write the code?" Anna swallowed, her voice steady despite her pounding heart. "Yes, sir." Richard studied her, his face betraying a flicker of something confusion, regret, maybe even shame. "Why didn't you say anything? Why let Paul take the credit until the audit dragged it out?" Anna held his gaze, the memory of that day in the boardroom flashing back, the laughter, the whispers, his voice cutting her down. Her throat tightened, but she refused to look away. "Because you made it clear my voice didn't matter," she said quietly. The words hung in the air like a blade. Richard's jaw clenched. He looked down briefly, as if struck. For a man so accustomed to control, so sure of himself, it was a rare moment of vulnerability. He paced slowly, his polished shoes clicking softly against the hardwood floor. "I misjudged you," he admitted at last, his voice heavy. "When you spoke in that meeting, He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "I assumed you were out of line, that you didn't understand what you were saying. But you did. You saw what none of us could." Anna's fingers curled against her notebook. She wanted to feel satisfaction at his words, but the ache of his dismissal was still too fresh. "I wasn't trying to prove myself," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "I was trying to help, and you humiliated me. You told me to fetch coffee while the company burned. Do you have any idea how small that made me feel?" Richard stopped pacing. He turned to face her, and for once the armor in his eyes cracked. "Yes," he said softly. "I do now." Silence stretched between them, filled only by the faint hum of the heating system. Richard ran a hand through his dark hair, his shoulders slumping slightly. It was the first time Anna had ever seen him look less than invincible. "I owe you an apology," he said finally. The words seemed to cost him something, as though dragged out from a place long unused. "Not just for dismissing you in that meeting, but for failing to recognize what you've been doing all along. You carried this company on your back without anyone noticing." "Without me noticing?" Anna blinked, stunned. She had never imagined hearing such words from him, yet they didn't erase the sting of what had happened. "You trusted Paul instead," she said quietly. Richard's mouth tightened. "Yes, and it was a mistake I won't forget." He moved back toward his desk, resting his hands on the polished surface. "Tell me, Anna, why do you keep doing this? Working late, analyzing problems that aren't part of your job description, giving this company more than it's ever given you." Why her throat ached with the weight of the truth. She looked down at her hands, then back up at him. "Because I believe in what we make here, I believe in the people who need it. My mother is alive today because of one of our devices. That's why I can't just sit by and watch things fall apart, even if no one listens to me." Richard stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he nodded. "I understand." The silence that followed wasn't hostile, nor was it comfortable. It was heavy with the recognition of a bridge burned and, perhaps, the faintest possibility of rebuilding it. Anna stood tall, though her heart still pounded. "You don't have to apologize to me, Mr. Caldwell, but if you really mean what you say, then stop treating people like their worth is tied to their title." Her words landed like a quiet challenge. Richard's lips pressed into a thin line, then softened. "You're right," he said, "and I'll try." For a man like him, Anna realized, that was no small promise. She turned toward the door, her hand on the knob, but before leaving, she looked back at him one last time. For the first time, she didn't see just the cold, untouchable CEO. She saw a man wrestling with the consequences of his pride. "Thank you for telling me the truth," Richard said quietly. Anna gave a faint nod, then stepped out into the hallway. And for the first time since she had dared to raise her voice in that boardroom, she felt seen. The announcement came early Wednesday morning, an all-hands meeting at 10 a.m. in the main auditorium of Caldwell Tower. Attendance mandatory, no details given. By 9:30, the building buzzed with restless energy. Employees filed toward the massive auditorium, their conversations clipped, curious, uncertain. Whispers carried down hallways and echoed in elevators. What's this about? Maybe it's damage control after the audit. Or maybe someone's head is about to roll. Anna moved with the crowd, clutching her notepad, though she had no need of it. Her pulse hammered in her ears as she slipped into a seat near the back. She preferred the shadows. If people looked too closely, they might see how her hands trembled. The auditorium lights dimmed. A hush spread through the crowd as Richard Caldwell stepped onto the stage. Tall, commanding, immaculately dressed in a navy suit. He looked every bit the leader they knew, yet his expression carried a gravity that silenced even the most skeptical whispers. He approached the podium, resting both hands firmly on either side. His voice, when it came, was clear, steady, but softer than usual. "This company," Richard began, "has weathered its share of storms, but in recent weeks, we faced a crisis that could have crippled us." The room was silent, every gaze fixed on him. "You were told that the solution came from one of our senior leaders." Richard continued. "That was a lie?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. Heads turned, eyes widened. Richard let the murmur settle before going on. "The truth is, the idea that saved this company came from someone most of you pass by every day without noticing. Someone who has worked quietly, diligently, without recognition. That ends today." He lifted his gaze, scanning the sea of faces before landing on the back rows. "Anna Miller, please stand." Anna froze. Her chest tightened, her legs heavy as stone. For a heartbeat, she considered staying seated, disappearing into the crowd. But slowly, shakily, she rose to her feet. Hundreds of eyes swung toward her. Some widened in surprise. Others softened with recognition, as though noticing her for the first time. A murmur ran through the auditorium. Richard's voice carried over the room. "Anna Miller is the reason our system stabilized. She is the reason our clients still trust us. And she is the reason Caldwell Dynamics still stands." The silence broke into applause, tentative at first, then swelling, echoing through the hall like rolling thunder. Anna's cheeks burned. She wanted to shrink under the weight of it, but she stood tall, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. For so long, she had been invisible. And now, the entire company was looking at her. Richard raised a hand, quieting the room. His tone sharpened. In contrast, Paul Bennett, the director of operations who claimed credit for her work, has been asked to resign effective immediately. The crowd erupted with shocked gasps, even from the back. Anna could see Paul sitting rigidly near the front, his face pale, his jaw tight. He rose abruptly and stalked out. the sound of the doors slamming behind him echoing across the stunned audience. Richard's voice carried on. Furthermore, Pamela Hayes, who aided in concealing the truth, has been terminated from her position as head of human resources. This time, the reaction was sharper, half relief, half disbelief. Pamela wasn't in the room, but her absence spoke volumes. Richard's tone softened again as he concluded, "Let today be a reminder. Titles do not define brilliance. Hierarchy does not guarantee wisdom. Sometimes, the quietest voices hold the answers we most need. And if we fail to listen, we risk losing more than we can afford." He stepped back from the podium. "Anna, on behalf of Caldwell Dynamics, and on behalf of myself, thank you." The applause surged again, louder, fuller, accompanied now by cheers. Some employees stood, others clapped until their hands were red. Anna's throat tightened. She blinked fast, fighting back the tears that burned her eyes. For years, she had dreamed of being seen, of being heard. Now it was happening, and yet, it felt almost too heavy to carry. The meeting adjourned with an air of stunned energy. People clustered in small groups, their voices buzzing with the news. Anna slipped out quietly, hoping to escape the spotlight, but it was too late. Colleagues she had never spoken to before approached her with handshakes, smiles, even awkward pats on the shoulder. "Congratulations. I always knew you had something special. We're lucky you're here." Their kindness was genuine, but it left Anna unsettled. Just days ago, many of them had laughed, or worse, ignored her completely. Now they looked at her like a hero. In the elevator ride back up to her floor, she caught her reflection in the mirrored walls. Her eyes were wide, her expression caught between pride and fear. She had won. She had been vindicated. But victory was complicated. She couldn't shake the memory of Derek's words, or rather, Paul's. When he mocked her once, "No one wants to hear that their solutions come from a secretary." Would this recognition last, or would it fade as quickly as it had come, leaving her once again invisible? The elevator doors opened. Anna stepped out, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. Around her, people watched differently now, curious, respectful, even admiring. She smiled politely, but her heart whispered another truth. This was only the beginning. The storm of recognition hadn't settled by the next morning. The company buzzed with a new rhythm, one that seemed to hum around Anna wherever she went. People who had once brushed past her in the hallways now paused to greet her. Engineers who rarely made eye contact smiled and waved. A sticky note appeared on her desk with a scrawled message. "You saved us. Thank you." But with every new glance, every whispered congratulations, Anna felt a quiet unease. The world had turned upside down so suddenly. Applause faded quickly. She knew that from experience. What would be left when the awe disappeared late in the afternoon? Richard Caldwell called her into his office. The moment she stepped inside, she sensed a shift. The man behind the mahogany desk wasn't the imperious CEO who had once cut her down with a single sharp remark. His shoulders were less rigid, his voice quieter when he spoke. "Anna, have a seat." She sat across from him, her notebook resting in her lap, though she doubted she'd need it. Richard folded his hands. For a long moment, he simply studied her, as though searching for words strong enough to match the moment. "Finally," he said, "you don't belong behind that desk outside my office. Not anymore." Anna blinked. "Excuse me, I've spoken with the board," Richard continued, his tone measured but resolute. "They agree with me. I want you to move into strategic development. Effective immediately." Her heart thudded in her chest. Strategic development. A world away from scheduling meetings and fetching coffee. It was where the company's future was designed, where voices shaped direction, not just documented it. Still, her instinct was hesitation. "Why me?" she asked carefully. Richard leaned back slightly, his eyes never leaving hers. "Because you see things the rest of us miss. Because you cared enough to work on a problem no one else would touch. Because you had the courage to speak when it would have been easier to stay silent." Anna's chest tightened. She wanted to believe him, But a memory cut through the boardroom, the laughter, his voice slicing her down. Stick to scheduling my meetings and fetching coffee. She drew in a slow breath. Forgive me, Mr. Caldwell, but it's hard to reconcile this with the man who humiliated me in front of everyone. Richard flinched almost imperceptibly, but he didn't deny it. His voice softened. I know. And you have every reason to doubt me. The silence stretched. Anna's thoughts tangled in a knot of doubt and longing. She had dreamed of this, an opportunity to matter, to use her mind, to prove she was more than a background figure. But could she accept it from him? Richard broke the silence, his voice steadier now. I can't change the past, Anna, but I can try to change what comes next. You deserve more than recognition. You deserve a place where your ideas are heard, where your work shapes the future of this company. Anna looked down at her notebook, the worn cover etched with years of scribbles and half-formed solutions. Her whole life had been a struggle between invisibility and the need to be heard. And now, the very man who once silenced her was offering her a seat at the table. But at what cost? Her voice trembled as she asked, "What happens if I disagree with you again? If I suggest something you don't like, am I going to be humiliated again in front of the entire team?" Richard's jaw tightened. For a moment, she saw the old arrogance flicker across his face, but then it faded. He exhaled slowly, his shoulders lowering. "No," he said, his voice almost raw. "Not again. You have my word." His eyes met hers, and in them she saw something unfamiliar. Not condescension, not dismissal. Respect. Genuine, unshakable respect. Anna held his gaze, searching for cracks, for the glint of the man who once called her out of turn. But what she found instead was sincerity, unpolished and imperfect, but real. Her heart warred with itself. The cautious part screamed for her to refuse, to protect herself from future pain. But another part, the part that still burned with determination, leaned forward toward the chance she had waited for all her life. Strategic development, she murmured, tasting the words like they were foreign. Richard allowed himself the faintest smile. Yes, she straightened, her voice firmer now. I'll consider it. But understand this, I'm not stepping into that role to make you look good, or to clean up after mistakes made by men with bigger titles. If I accept, it will be on my terms. I won't be silenced again. Something flickered in Richard's expression. Amusement, perhaps admiration. Fair enough, he said softly. The room was quiet again, but this time the silence felt different, less like a chasm between them, more like a bridge still under construction. Anna rose, clutching her notebook against her chest. I'll give you my answer soon. Richard gave a small nod, but his eyes lingered on her as she walked toward the door. It wasn't just acknowledgement, it was something deeper, something she had never seen in him before. Respect, and perhaps, though she dared not name it, the beginnings of trust. The Marriott Grand Ballroom in downtown Silvergate shimmered with polished chandeliers and rows of white draped tables. Doctors in tailored suits, executives from biotech firms, and government health officials filled the space, their conversations a low, steady hum. It was the annual National Medical Innovation Summit, a gathering where reputations were built or broken. Anna stood behind the curtain backstage, clutching her folder of notes. Her breath came in shallow waves. She had faced boardrooms and audits, but this was different. Hundreds of strangers sat waiting beyond the curtain, ready to judge her not as a secretary, but as a speaker. David Harper had wished her luck earlier that morning. Margaret had called from their small apartment, her voice gentle but strong. Just remember, you know this better than anyone else. They need to hear you. Still. Anna's hands trembled. She smoothed her navy blazer, whispering to herself, "You belong here." A voice boomed from the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Richard Caldwell, CEO of Caldwell Dynamics." Polite applause swelled as Richard strode across the stage with his usual composure. He spoke briefly, acknowledging the recent crisis the company had faced, then added, "But today, you won't be hearing from me. The real story, the real solution, belongs to someone else. Anna Miller, please join me on stage." The applause shifted curious, cautious. A secretary speaking at a national summit, some faces lit with intrigue, others furrowed in doubt. Anna inhaled deeply and stepped out from behind the curtain. The lights hit her eyes, blinding at first. A sea of faces stretched before her, waiting. She gripped the podium, her pulse thundering in her ears. "Good morning," she began, her voice wavering slightly before finding its strength. "My name is Anna Miller. I work at Caldwell Dynamics, and I'd like to share with you the path that led us to stabilize our critical care systems during the recent crisis." Slides lit up behind her, data and graphs carefully prepared. She spoke steadily, explaining how she had analyzed logs, noticed patterns, and redesigned the traffic flow algorithms. She was just finding her rhythm when a commotion erupted at the back of the hall. A man's voice, loud and bitter. "You're all being lied to?" The audience twisted in their seats, whispers rippling. Anna froze, her stomach clenched, and then she saw him, Paul Bennett, disheveled, his tie loosened, his eyes wild with sleepless defiance. He strode down the center aisle, ignoring the ushers scrambling after him. "You're listening to a secretary?" he barked, pointing an accusing finger at Anna. "She answers phones, takes notes, fetches coffee, and you want to believe she saved a multi-million-dollar company?" The room gasped. Anna's throat tightened. Her old humiliation threatened to rise again, to drown her. But before she could speak, Richard Caldwell stepped forward from his seat at the front. "That's enough." "Paul," Richard said, his voice cold and commanding. Paul sneered. "Enough. You're destroying this company's credibility by parading a clerk as a genius. It was my leadership that carried us through. And you know it." Richard's eyes narrowed. "No. What I know is this: you lied, you stole, and you jeopardized everything. Anna Miller is the reason we're standing here with solutions instead of losses. She earned this stage. You forfeited any right to it." The room erupted with murmurs. Some applauded softly, emboldened by Richard's words. Paul's face flushed red. "You'll regret this," he spat before security finally reached him. His voice echoed as they dragged him toward the doors. "She's nothing but a secretary. You'll all see." The doors slammed shut. The silence that followed was thick, trembling. Anna stood frozen at the podium, her chest heaving. The old doubts clawed at her. Maybe he's right. Maybe they'll never see me as more than that. She glanced at Richard, his gaze locked with hers, steady and resolute. He gave a small nod, not a command, not a push, but a signal. "You can do this." Anna drew in a breath and turned back to the microphone. Her voice shook for the first few words, then steadied with each sentence. "Yes, I am a secretary," she said, her eyes sweeping across the room. "I schedule meetings. I answer phones. I make sure the small things get done so the big things can happen. But I'm also someone who studies, who works late nights, who believes that when patients' lives are on the line, no idea is too small to matter." The audience leaned in, the tension easing. "I don't stand here today because of a title," Anna continued, her voice stronger now. "I stand here because I saw a problem and refused to ignore it. And if there's anything I want you to take away, it's this: innovation doesn't come from hierarchy. It comes from courage, the courage to speak, and the courage to listen." For a heartbeat, the hall was silent. Then applause broke out, hesitant at first, then growing, rolling like thunder through the ballroom. Some rose to their feet, doctors, executives, even competitors clapped with genuine respect. Anna's chest swelled with something she had never felt before, not just pride, but belonging. Richard stepped up beside her, his expression softer than she had ever seen. He leaned just close enough for her to hear. "You did more than hold your ground. You turned the tide." Anna exhaled, a shaky smile tugging at her lips. She had survived Paul's venom. She had spoken her truth, and for the first time, she believed it fully herself. The snow had started falling again by the time Anna's cab pulled up in front of her apartment building. Fine flakes swirled under the glow of the street lamps, softening the edges of the world into quiet silver. Inside, the adrenaline of the summit still pulsed in her veins. She replayed every moment in her mind: the applause, Paul's outburst, Richard's defense. It felt surreal, like something that had happened to someone else. She paid the driver and stepped out, her heels crunching against the thin crust of ice. Pulling her coat tighter around her, Anna made her way toward the entrance. And then she froze. A tall figure stood near the curb, half shadowed beneath the lamplight. Snow dusted the shoulders of his long overcoat, and his breath curled in the frigid air. Richard Caldwell. Anna's pulse skipped. "Mr. Caldwell," she called, her voice uncertain. He turned, and for the first time she saw him not as the polished CEO of Caldwell Dynamics, but as a man, his hair damp with snow, his expression unguarded, weary. "I didn't mean to startle you," Richard said, his voice low. I didn't want to leave things unfinished after today." Anna hesitated, her hand still on the railing. "You came all the way here in this weather." He gave a faint, almost sheepish smile. "Believe it or not, some things can't wait for business hours." For a moment, neither spoke. Snowflakes settled in Anna's hair, melting into cold rivulets down her cheeks. Finally, she sighed and gestured toward the stoop. "Come inside before you freeze." Upstairs, the apartment was warm, faintly scented with chamomile and the pine candle her mother had lit earlier. Margaret was already asleep in the next room, her soft breathing a steady rhythm. Richard stood awkwardly just inside the door, his imposing frame somehow diminished by the modest space. He removed his gloves, running a hand through his damp hair, searching for words. "I owe you more than an apology," he began. His voice wasn't the commanding tone of a CEO. It was softer, almost hesitant. "Today at the summit, that wasn't just about vindicating you. It was about admitting how wrong I've been. Not only about the crisis, but about you." Anna set her bag down on the small table by the door, crossing her arms. She didn't speak, waiting. Richard's eyes met hers. "Steady now. I let myself be blinded by titles, by hierarchy. I dismissed you because I assumed brilliance could only come from the top. And worse, I let people like Paul and Pamela feed into that arrogance. I was wrong, completely, unforgivably wrong." The words hung heavy in the air. Anna's throat tightened. She had imagined hearing this, had wanted it, but the reality felt almost overwhelming. He took a slow step closer. "When you spoke in that boardroom weeks ago, I shut you down because it was easier to believe the people I already trusted than to open my mind to you. And I've been regretting it ever since." Anna's heart ached, memories flashing: the laughter, the sting of humiliation, the nights she doubted herself. She exhaled shakily. "You made me feel invisible, like no matter what I did, it wouldn't matter. Do you have any idea how long I've carried that?" Richard's expression darkened, as if her words struck deeper than he'd expected. "I do now," he said softly. Silence settled between them again, broken only by the muffled hum of the old radiator. Finally, Richard spoke again, his voice lower, raw. "I don't just want to make amends as your boss. I want to start over with honesty this time. No titles, no walls, just the truth." Anna's pulse quickened. There was something in his tone she hadn't heard before, an earnestness that felt dangerous in its sincerity. But caution held her back. "Words are easy," she said quietly. "You can stand in front of a crowd and call me a hero. But when the next crisis comes, what then? Will you listen to me? Or will you decide again that my voice doesn't belong?" Richard's jaw tightened, but not with anger, with resolve. "Then you hold me accountable. You remind me of this moment, because I don't ever want to go back to being that man." Anna searched his face. The arrogance she once despised was gone, replaced by something stripped bare. vulnerability. Her defenses wavered, just slightly. She moved toward the window, pulling back the curtain to reveal the snowfall blanketing the street below. "You've built your whole life on control," she said softly, "and now you're asking me to believe you've changed overnight." Richard joined her by the window, the glow of the street lamp casting sharp lines across his face. "Not overnight," he admitted, "but because of you, because you showed me what I refused to see." Anna's breath caught. She looked away quickly, afraid her face might reveal too much. Behind them, Margaret stirred briefly in her room, then quieted again. The sound grounded Anna, reminding her of the real reasons she fought so hard, not for recognition, not even for respect, but for the lives touched by the work they did. Turning back, she met Richard's gaze. "I don't know if I can just forget everything," she said honestly. "I'm not asking you to forget," he replied. "I'm asking for the chance to prove I mean what I say." For the first time, Anna saw the man not as the untouchable CEO, but as someone flawed, struggling, trying. And though her instincts screamed for caution, a small spark of trust flickered inside her. Snow tapped softly against the window pane as the silence stretched again. Finally, Anna nodded faintly, one step at a time. A slow breath left Richard's chest, as though he'd been holding it all night. His lips curved into the smallest smile. "One step at a time," he echoed. And for the first time, Anna believed he meant it. Monday morning arrived with skies washed in pale gold. The storm had passed, leaving Silvergate gleaming under fresh snow. Anna's breath clouded in the frosty air as she walked toward Caldwell Tower, the glass facade catching the sunrise like a beacon. Her heels clicked with a steady rhythm, each step echoing a truth she had fought to prove she belonged here. When she pushed through the revolving doors, the lobby felt different, not colder, not hostile, but alive. Faces she once passed unnoticed now turned toward her with warmth. A receptionist she had only known by sight smiled and said, "Good morning, Ms. Miller." The words nearly startled her. For years she had been the girl at the desk. If she was acknowledged at all, now, even her name carried weight. She rode the elevator to the 9th floor, her pulse quickening. The door slid open to reveal a space she had only glimpsed before the Strategic Development Division. Bright, spacious, filled with sleek workstations and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, and there, at the end of the hall, waited her office. Anna stepped inside slowly, almost reverently. It wasn't large by executive standards, but it was hers. A modest desk, a comfortable chair, a bookshelf waiting to be filled. A small plaque on the door read, "Anna Miller, Strategic Development Associate." She ran her fingers lightly over the engraved letters, her throat tightening. Within minutes, colleagues began stopping by, engineers from R&D, project managers, even department heads, people who once passed her without a second glance. "Welcome aboard, Anna. Looking forward to working with you. You've earned this." Their smiles were genuine, their respect hard-won. Still, a small voice inside whispered caution. Respect could fade, recognition could be fleeting, but today, she chose to accept it as it was a beginning. By mid-morning, her desk was scattered with fresh documents, project proposals, meeting requests, a thick binder of system reports, real work, work that mattered. She took a moment to breathe it in, the hum of conversation outside her door, the quiet power of being seen not as a secretary, but as a strategist. Rising from her chair, Anna crossed to the window. The view stretched wide over Silvergate, the rooftops sparkling with snow, the river cutting a silver line through the city. Somewhere below, life moved on, as always, buses weaving through traffic, children bundled in scarves, shopkeepers sweeping snow from their stoops. Her gaze softened as she thought of Margaret. Her mother would still be asleep at this hour, the morning sun spilling across her quilt, the woman who had carried her through childhood with strength and sacrifice, who had said, "You were born to do more than take notes." Anna smiled faintly. She wished Margaret could see her now, standing in her own office, her name etched on the door. In truth, this victory belonged to both of them. Her eyes drifted to her reflection in the glass. She saw not just the woman who had been overlooked, underestimated, dismissed. She saw someone who had endured humiliation and still stood tall, someone who had chosen courage over silence. Behind her, a knock sounded at the door. Richard Caldwell stepped inside, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He set one gently on her desk. "Thought you could use this," he said. Anna arched an eyebrow. "Since when does Richard Caldwell deliver coffee?" A rare smile tugged at his lips. "Since someone reminded me that leadership isn't about titles. Consider it a peace offering." For the first time, she allowed herself a small laugh. "Thank you." He glanced around her office, then back at her. His expression carried something different now, not authority, not pity, but respect, perhaps even admiration. "You've earned this," Richard said quietly. "Don't ever doubt that again." Anna met his gaze, steady and unflinching. "I won't. Not anymore." He nodded once, then excused himself, leaving her in the quiet warmth of her new space. Anna returned to the window, coffee in hand. The city sprawled before her. The past weeks had been a storm of humiliation, betrayal, and revelation, but from it had emerged something unshakable. The truth, she whispered to herself. The word steady as a vow. Truth has a way of finding the light. And with that, she turned back to her desk, her heart steady, her steps sure. The journey wasn't over. It was only beginning. At its heart, Anna's story is not just about corporate politics or technology. It is about the quiet strength so many of us carry. Too often, society measures worth by titles, paychecks, or status. Yet true wisdom, resilience, and innovation often come from those who are overlooked, the ones who keep showing up with steady hands and open hearts. Anna reminds us that courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a quiet voice that speaks truth when silence would be safer. Sometimes it's choosing integrity when others choose shortcuts. And sometimes it's simply believing in yourself when no one else will. For those of us who have lived long enough to know the sting of being underestimated, or the regret of underestimating others, this story is a call to listen more deeply, to ourselves, to the people around us, to the voices we might have once dismissed. Because in the end, truth has a way of finding the light. And when it does, it not only redeems the silenced, it can transform those willing to hear it. May we never forget, it's never too late to recognize worth, to honor courage, and to choose humility over pride. Thank you so much for spending your time with Shining Stories. If Anna's journey touched your heart, we'd love for you to join our community by liking this video, sharing it with someone who might need encouragement today, and subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us continue bringing stories of hope, courage, and truth to life. Until next time, remember, every story has the power to shine.